Are we live? Bene, buonasera. Buonasera, io sono Annalisa Piras, giornalista, filmmaker e campaigner per le riforme dell'Unione Europea. Benvenuti al webinar organizzato dal Tank Vision in preparazione per la quarta conferenza di Siena sul futuro dell'Europa. Il titolo del webinar è switch to English. The advantages and disadvantages of being the forerunners in a sustainable finance. How can ESG regulations and carbon mitigation be more efficient and effective? So this webinar has been organized in order to prepare discussion in Siena and to advance as much as possible on the main point that we want to develop in Siena. Talking about the structure of this webinar, we are going to have a brief introduction by Clara from the Think Tank Vision, because unfortunately the director, Francesco Grillo, has had a technical problem with his computer and cannot join us now. And then we will have an introduction by the Vice Rector of the University of Siena, Simone Borghesi. And then we will have three main questions, and for each question we will make a round of intervention of our very distinguished panel. We have with us today Peter Wies, who's a former official of the European Commission and now works for Brad Consulting. Then we have Professor Anastasios Xepapadeas, currently Professor of Economics at the Department of Economics at the University of Bologna, and Professor Emeritus at the Department of International and European Economic Studies at the University. Then Professor Massimiliano Mazzanti, currently Associate Professor and Lecturer in Environmental Economics at the University of Ferrara, and we will be also joined at the end by the students of the University of Siena who have prepared the concept paper, Mira Tiwari, Ilaria Di Battista, and Matteo Mazzarano. So just to remind us of the title of this webinar, which is the advantages and disadvantages of being the forerunners of sustainable finance and regulations and carbon mitigation more efficient and effective. And the three questions that we're going to try to put in focus in order to develop them in Siena are, the first one is the key challenges in ESG regulation that need to be prioritized with a focus on ESG disclosure mandated by the European Banking Authority. Number two, the role and pros and cons of financial stakeholders trading in ETS and DCMS. And three, the implications of carbon offset versus carbon mitigation in organizations green claim and ECG. So without further ado, I will give the floor first to Clara and then to Simone Borghesi.
Thank you. Thank you all, and thank you, Annalisa. Hello, everyone. This is Clara Donati from Vision Think Tank. I'm sorry that you cannot see me today, but I'm here. We wanted to begin this webinar, this meeting, with a short introduction to what is the 2023 Siena conference, which will take place in almost 2 weeks. The objective of this meeting at this webinar is to set the work and start the work of one of the 4 working groups that will meet then in Siena in June, the 8th of June. The Siena conference is a 3-day meeting that is convened by Vision and University of Siena, where almost 70 personalities were gathered to discuss the European future and its most recent challenge, within a more informal framework that we are used to. One of the main characteristics of this vision initiative is that we have the ambition of becoming a stable problem-solving platform where individuals from different backgrounds and political ideas can come together to meet and find a common ground. We will try to go beyond ideology, and the conference will bring together, for example, 5 European political foundations, as well as individuals from different professional backgrounds, such as business and regulatory fields, for example. We will also have participants from various academic domains and also different geographic areas. The process that we are experimenting in this conference starts from a concept paper that Vision wrote, which outlines each problem-solving sessions. This year, the concept note is based on last year's final document of the conference, which was the 2022 Pontignano paper. The students of the University of Siena are working on this concept paper, and we are organizing these meetings and webinars to assist them in preparing their final version of this concept note. And this meeting today will contribute as one of the inputs for the students' work. So thank you, I want to thank you all of you for being here and help them also. This document, this concept note, will be then discussed in Siena by all the conference participants, who will be divided in the 4 working problem-solving groups. The outcomes of these sessions will be presented on the last day at the conference, and then will be a part of the final Pontignano paper 2023, which will be then shared with European institutions, national institutions, and the media. Our hope is that by the end of the conference, we will have put together new and fresh ideas and different solutions, challenging questions regarding Europe's future. And we thought of this conference structure to try and encourage this kind of outcome. So I want to again thank you everyone, and I really look forward to hearing your views on this specific and interesting problem-solving group. So thank you, and I would like to leave the floor to Simone.
Thank you, Clara. Thank you, Annalisa. I think there is a stormy weather over there for where Annalisa is, and probably where Clara is as well. So we have some technical issues for this reason, but still, I'm super happy to introduce this webinar, and as anticipated, with the final goal of, let's say, breaking the ice and prepare the ground for the discussion that we will have in Pontignano. Last year, we decided to focus on the European Green Deal and on the path towards climate neutrality with a group of scholars, policymakers, stakeholders involving Phoebe Kunduri, Jos Del Becche, Carlo Papa, and others. And this year, we decided to go more specifically on sustainable finance and the pros and cons of being the forerunner. And no doubt, Europe is a forerunner for many reasons. We have reduced emissions more than other jurisdictions. We use more stringent policies. We have adopted a large framework represented by the European Green Deal, but also more specifically by the Fit for 55, Repower EU, and we continue updating our ambition. We were the first to introduce an emission trading system. We were the first to aim at climate neutrality by 2050. We are the first with a mandatory regulation to measure ESG risk and performance. This regulation will be active from January next year and will be supervised by the European Banking Authority. And it's basically based on 2 pillars, so to speak. The grid asset ratio, so the share that banks will devote to activities that are in line with the EU taxonomy, and green claims and voluntary disclosures. Now, these two pillars are equally important, but they both might run into problems. The definition of the activities might be too specific and too rigid sometimes in terms of the taxonomy, and the green claims might be too lenient because they might open the door to practices that are not always fully sustainable. And this leads me to one of the points we want to address in this talk, namely the fact that there is so much attention now on offsets and voluntary carbon markets. Green claims might encompass also offsetting activities that companies do to compensate elsewhere for their emissions. But this offsetting activity might raise problems in terms of scientific integrity. How can we ensure that the auditors are really independent? Social integrity. How can we avoid harmful activities for local communities? Financial integrity in terms of how avoiding excessive or, let's say, speculative activities. And environmental integrity. How can we ensure that offsets are permanent and that we avoid double counting? So lots of questions and lots of problems in front of us. Offset and voluntary carbon markets are also the object of the research I'm currently carrying out with my team at the University of Siena. And here you see my team members, Mira, Ilaria, and Matteo. And in particular, in this context, we will try to examine the problems and the potentialities of the voluntary carbon markets in the agri-food sector, in a sort of lab experiment involving local companies, local actors, to measure the offsetting potential and the possible returns of sustainable practices in agri-food sector. But this meeting is not about us, it's about you, because we want to know your opinion on the questions that Annalisa was posing, because this will help the team to prepare the concept note. So it's really, as it was said, an experiment and an activity which involves our students, although grown-up students that are mature students, I would say, with a great experience, but that's what we would like to do. So without much further ado, Annalisa, do you want to start with the questions? Do you want me to shoot the questions?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Because, I mean, quite fittingly talking about climate change, half an hour ago there was the sun and it was summer, and now we're being hit by a freak storm. There is a real freak storm with lightning and torrential rain. So I don't know if I will stay with you for much longer because I might lose the internet connection. But yes, regulations. I would like, as being a non-expert but a communicator, to try to focus our minds on the urgency of the current situation and the fact that, according to all scientists, I mean, we've got 7 years before 2030 to try to contain emissions before the climate change will be reversible. So we've been talking about regulations for a very long time, and we're here today to try to focus on what are effective regulations. You mentioned, Simone, that Europe is a forerunner, but is that enough? I would like to call on Pedersen, who was a former official of the European Commission, who has worked extensively on what Europe can do on regulations, to help us understand where we are at and if what we have at the moment is really effective and adequate to face the gravity of the situation we are in now. Peter Wies is a former official of the European Commission and has also been lecturing at St. Andrews College, Oxford, and a European University. Peter, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for those introductory remarks. I perhaps want to start with a question. Before we discuss the advantages and disadvantages of being a forerunner on sustainable finance, why be a forerunner on sustainable finance? What purpose would that serve? And of course, it's, excuse the telephone, I can't stop it ringing, but I'll tell you that the starting point is that fossil fuels are the default fuel in our society and in our economy. They have the advantage of incumbency. All of our technologies today are made in such a way as to use fossil fuels. And we've got to change that for climate change reasons. You know, we have to move away from fossil fuels. And there are technologies that enable us to avoid using fossil fuels, but in reality, they are more expensive technologies and they need financing. And financing those more sustainable technologies can be called sustainable finance. The point is, those technologies, the sustainable technologies, are not cost competitive with the fossil fuels. So we've got to change things, and you know, sustainable finance is a prerequisite for those sustainable technologies to emerge and be deployed and widely adopted. So certainly, if we want to develop our economy in a sustainable way in the long term, we need sustainable finance to help get us there, because the technologies don't survive unless they get financed. And of course, as technologies are deployed at scale, the costs of these technologies falls through technology learning. And we've seen this with things like wind turbines or solar PV panels. Their costs have fallen very substantially with scale. But if you look at other technologies we might need, like green hydrogen, it's far too expensive today. It can't compete with the default, which is hydrogen made from fossil fuels. So given that it can't compete, we have to be ready to put sustainable finance behind the new technologies, the sustainable technologies. So that's why I think there is a topic to discuss. And the benefits, of course, are that we will get those sustainable technologies, they will become competitive sooner if Europe and other jurisdictions provides the right financing incentives. I stop there, but I would have more to say, but we've got to displace fossil fuels. That's really the task in front of us. And so sustainable finance is part of that new transition towards the new technologies. Okay, I stop there because I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but I could say something about the sort of normal regulatory techniques, if you like, but I stop to let others intervene.
Thank you very much, Peter. Let me call in on your last point, Professor Xepapadeas, who has carried out extensive research in this field. Professor Xepapadeas, to pick up on this point that Peter made, I mean, the investment that we really need in order to displace fossil fuels is so enormous that it is very difficult to imagine how in the next 7 years, I mean, before this cutting date of 2030 to avoid irreparable catastrophe, how can we do it? Because unless we find a way of doing it collectively, there is no hope.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to the webinar, and thank you very much for the question, which is, talking about finance. It's the $1 million question. How do we finance this transition? Now, let me give you a few numbers. Now, inflows into what Peter called sustainable funds rose from something like 5 billion in 2018 to something like 2.5 trillion by the mid-2022. There's been a fall from the beginning of 22 towards the end of 22, but the fall was smaller than compared to the average of the market. So there is money involved. One of the key characteristics of which is associated with the sustainable finance, and then I want to come to one of the questions that started at the beginning, was the ESG score. I mean, firms have started to disclose in the ESG, and there's been a huge growth in the disclosure idea behind ESG. So one question that relates now ESG with financing the transition, and also relates to what Simone said at the beginning about EBA and the disclosures of different ratios there. How is ESG related to the ability to finance? ESG firms, firms that score, have good scores in terms of ESG, are they profitable? Do they reward their shareholders? Do they reward their investors so that more finance would come through this channel? This is a big question. And to be honest, I don't have either a positive or a negative number. When we start talking about ESG, there's some conceptual issues. For example, I'm an economist, so I come from economics. So I always look at issues like profit maximization, value maximization, and so on. But when we deal with ESG, how we measure it? Do we try to maximize ESG? And if we maximize ESG, which part of ESG, the E, the S, or the G? So there is conceptual issues there that needs to be addressed. On the other hand, I got some data again, and I don't know, can I share my screen for a second? Can I share my screen with you?
I'm not sure that we can do that.
Anyway, I just described it. There's some data that try to correlate firms with improving ESG, improvers, or firms that deteriorate in ESG, and try to correlate improvers or deteriorators with a concept of total shareholder return. It seems that there is slight positive correlation, but it's not very clear. So the issue is there. We have lots of funds as sustainable funds. We have this concept of ESG that banks need to report to EBA, but we still don't know how these things correlate. But there's something there, and I think this is a very important area for research. I will finish with one sentence. Last week, I was at a conference organized by Bundesbank, and the idea was, the title was Central Banks and Climate Change. And there was one paper there that was trying to understand, to research whether firms with good ESG score do better in green patents, which is important because I agree with what Peter says. We don't have enough green technologies to substitute fossil fuels. We have certain mainstream technologies, but most of technologies are missing. And there is an important issue there. Can high-score ESG firms sustain and promote innovation in green technology? There is another issue of research. So there are lots of questions. The topic is open. It might help us move towards sustainable financing, but lots of questions need to be answered. And I will stop here.
Thank you very much, Professor Xepapadeas. I would give the floor now to Professor Massimiliano Mazzanti, currently Associate Professor and Lecturer in Environmental Economics at the University of Ferrara. Massimiliano, we have covered some ground and we have mixed a little bit a few of the questions, but I would like you, if you can, to carry them through. So we've talked about how effective the ESG regulations are, and we know that there is no consensus that they are the best tool. They mix several things: environment, society, governance. And then we have mentioned what are the incentives for companies, for the economy to displace fossil fuels. If you can pick up those two threads and maybe help us bringing them further along according to your research, please, the floor is yours.
Good evening, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'd like to link my knowledge and theory to some talks I had with friends, some bad guys for the financial sector. The situation, according to them, that's a sample of financial sector, is that the ESG disclosure and data creation and data sharing is a useful self-selection way to improve knowledge and also to enhance the quality. So the financial sector is using that type of information to filter and select firms. It is also useful for SMEs, the creation of data and more knowledge, the integration of data is also useful to increase performances by itself. Having said that, still today, it is possibly the case that we may observe in the short run higher than the average performances for more environmentally oriented firms who have better performances in terms of social and labor values. But given that it is huge, but still a niche in the sea of trillions and trillions, if you work in asset management and want to maximize the profit, you are not using part of the market. So in the first phase of the transition, to some extent, if I'm using this term, we still have a kind of willingness to pay. Willingness to pay for having something which is maybe not getting the same reward of the average market. So in this first phase, and then it is the policy commitment to year by year, period by period, to make ESG and sustainability a kind of mainstream, maybe in 2040, 45, 50. Okay, so that's the financial perspective if you want to maximize rewards and profits. So having said that, and I conclude this is my first observation. The financial sector is strongly looking at this type of topic because they link the sustainability transition, the financial transition with the demographic transition. So they look at the young generation of investors who are going to be in the next wave of investors. So I mean the demographic change is really something that we have to analyze in connection to the financial sector development.
Thank you very much, Massimiliano. I would like to bring back these reflections to Simone Borghesi, just to have your comments on this first round of point of views and comments. Simone?
Thank you, Annalisa. Yes, there are several points that were raised that I agree with, and a general, I cannot say skepticism, but certainly we are all very cautious about where this path can bring us, because it's still evolving, and it's also the regulation evolving along with the concepts. So there is certainly very much to learn and to monitor, if I may say so, in the evolution of this process. But Annalisa, if you agree, I see Francesco who has his hand up. So maybe Francesco is connected. Yes, I can see you, Francesco. Hello.
Yeah, hi.
Oh, welcome back, Francesco. We thought that you were lost without your computer somewhere, but
yeah. Yeah, I will try to say very briefly something from Bolzano. Yeah, briefly, I completely agree with Peter. The principle is irresistible. We need to be forerunner on sustainable finance. But as Stampari used to say, the details, the devil is in the details, and we have some details of implementation which are absolutely crucial. My point is, well, I am also an economist, no, as Anastasios, and I remember that the lesson of the first Nobel laureate in economics, Jan Tinbergen. He was Dutch. He won the first Nobel Prize in economics, and he proposed a rule by which for each policy objective, you need to have one instrument, no? So to make policies evaluable, and so that we can then fine-tune them. Here is when we talk about ESG, we have many policy objectives together, at least 3 big: environment, social, and government. So I very much agree that we should also reflect whether there are too many, 3, or if we want to concentrate on environment, at least as far as this policy is concerned, and very many different instruments and very many different indicators, which may dilute the effort. So this is the implementation puzzle that we should explore so that we can come up with a suggestion for the policymaker.
Thank you, Francesco. Can we move, conscious about time, and can we move to the second question that we want to put a bit more in focus? The role and the pros and cons of financial stakeholders trading in ETS and VCMs. Maybe we should ask Peter, what is his view on this?
Yes, thank you very much. I worked on emissions trading in the European Union for a very long time. So I like to discuss this. And the first point I would make is that sustainable finance and disclosure are all very well, but they're not enough. In practice, policymakers, I think, have the view that there needs to be a toolbox of measures. You need sustainable finance, but the opposite of that is that you need to actually penalize the polluters. You can't just help assist the new technologies. You have to actually make polluters pay. And that is what an emissions trading system is designed to do. It does in Europe, it does two things. It caps the emissions of the sectors of industry who are covered by an emissions trading system. And gradually that cap is reduced over time and will one day get to zero, at which point there will no longer be the ability for industry to pollute, because they can only pollute to the extent under the cap. Secondly, polluters must pay. There must be a cost of carbon. And so that is what the emissions trading has succeeded to do in Europe. The cost today is about 85 euros per ton of CO2. So that changes the dynamics for the fossil fuel industry, which is, we must always remember, that is the incumbent, that is the dominant technology today. If you're making steel, you're using coal. If you're making chemicals, you're probably using fossil fuels to power the processes and provide the heat. So we've got to change the status quo. And making polluters pay is a very good place to start. We do that in Europe by an emissions trading system, which indeed is done in a number of other countries across the world, and there's an increasing interest in it. You could also do it through carbon taxes, which again are applied in some countries and even some countries of the European Union. And those carbon taxes are in effect other tools to make polluters pay. And one of the great strengths of the polluter pays principle is that they generate revenues through making polluters pay, whether that be tax revenues or the auctioning revenues from an emissions trading system. And in practice in Europe now, those revenues are very substantial, in the region of 35 billion euros per year. That is a lot. And that money can then be used for good purpose by governments, both in providing sustainable finance sources, for example, but also for addressing questions of equity and social fairness. And I think the European Union does all of those things. So for me, I think the toolbox idea has to have in it both the polluter pays principle and the sustainable finance component and disclosure, because disclosure shines the light on those companies who are doing good things, and investors can put their money, if they want to, in those areas. But as I say, the premise at the moment is that these new technologies are not usually cost competitive. They don't produce profits for investors. We need to get to and a fossil fuel, on the contrary, is making massive profits. So we've got to turn those tables round. That is a big task. And we're going to need perhaps other tools as well in the future. But a good start is to have disclosure, to have such sources of sustainable finance available, and the polluter pays principle as well. Okay, and I stop there again.
Thank you, Peter. It seems to me that the polluter pays principle might be helpful, but there should be something that make the non-polluter win profit, because that's what's going to turn around the equation quick enough. So what I would like to understand, and I think it is important also to try to clarify this concept, because in all of this so far, the citizens, the civil society, which have a big role to play, have been very unclear on these aspects. And of course, they are not only stakeholders, but they are consumers, they are voters, and they are investors. So to understand how you can reward the non-polluter, not only make the polluter pay, but to reward someone who does not pollute and invest in non-polluting technology. How can we achieve that? By the way, I've just been informed that we've got quite a distinguished viewer just joined us, and I salute her, Fabrizia Pecorella, Deputy Director of OECD. Thank you very much for listening to us. It's good to know that there is someone there that actually is listening to this conversation and can do something also about it. So I would like to go back to Professor Xepapadeas. Is there, in your experience, you have spent decades studying this, is there something that you think could help invert this principle and bring us faster to let's reward the non-polluter, let's make the polluter pay, but also let's allow society as a whole to reward those who don't pollute and actually move in the right direction to avoid catastrophe. Professor, are you there? Maybe we have lost him.
No, I'm here.
Okay.
I was muted. Didn't want to disturb you. Well, actually, the main issue is that everybody pollutes. In this game, there are no non-polluters. I mean, even when we take our car to go out, we pollute. So I think that the main issue here is how we're going. There are two issues here. The first is how we're going to slow down emissions, how we mitigate. The truth is that by 2030, even at the most optimistic IPC scenario, we're going to cross the 1.5 threshold. I mean, now we're at 1.1 plus relative to the pre-industrial period. So we have left 0.4 degrees. By 2030, even at the most optimistic scenario, we're going to cross it. The target is, after we cross it, to slow it down and bring it back. And this can be done only by regulation. Climate change is an externality. As Tim Bergen, I mean, it was really interesting that Francesco remembered Tim Bergen with targets and instruments. But this is an externality, and the only way to stop an externality is the polluter pays principle, which is one aspect, or the more recent, the user pays principle, which has to do with payments for using ecosystem services. So as human society that uses fossil fuel or ecosystem to generate benefits, we have to pay. And for me, the best way is a carbon tax or a cap and trade. Now, if we want to compare this policy instrument with offsets, which is basically the idea that, what is an offset? An offset is that somehow I reduce emissions because I plant trees. Because I reduce emissions by certain tons, I create a credit and I sell it to someone that wants to emit. But look at the difference and the potency of the instrument. As Peter very well said, I checked it also, on the 23rd of May, the European price for ETS was 85 euros per ton. At the same day, the price of an offset in the aviation industry was €1.5. Okay. So there's a huge difference in the price of the instrument, and the lower the price for the carbon is, the less strong, the less incentives we have in order to reduce emissions. Now, what's the issue here? The issue here is that in order to reduce emissions and bring in the technologies, or the second aspect of climate change, in order to adapt, because, as I said, we crossed the 1.5 degree threshold, which means that we're going to have impacts of climate change. We show that impact. I mean, Italy, a few weeks ago, the flooding was related to climate change. In Greece, we had these huge fires 2 years ago. So we see the impact of climate change, and this needs adaptation. Adaptation needs investment, investment needs finance. Now we'll go back to finance. So the idea here is that we need to regulate strongly in order to mitigate. We need to invest in order to adapt and protect ourselves from the damage from climate change, and this needs to be financed. The fact that sustainable funds seems to increase is a good sign. I cannot say that this will solve the problem, but the sign is good. Also, another part of the, and I'm going to finish this sentence, another part of the problem is that once we introduce these instruments, carbon taxes or even cap and trade policies, part of the cost goes to the public. And this creates social inequalities. So the recycling of the benefits as an environmental benefit, as a climate benefit to the lower income classes might also prevent social frictions. So the idea is to try and finance this process, and this is a problem. This is a problem that all the bright minds surrounded around these different webinars or the great conference that Massimo is prepared. Hope
okay.
We'll try and do something about it.
We try to find solutions. We're getting near the end of our webinar, and we still got around to do about the third question, on which I'd like to call in Professor Mazzanti. So the third question was the implication of carbon offsets versus carbon mitigation in organizations, green claim and ECG. Obviously, again, from non-initiated sounds or the story of carbon offsets and planting trees somehow is a bit kind of a fig leaf for big polluters to show that they're doing something while they continue to pollute. What is the current view? Wouldn't it be better to somehow make it more stringent to mitigate your own emissions rather than buying trees, I don't know, in Namibia or Brazil? Massimiliano?
Okay, this is a pretty old debate, I mean, going back to the late 90s and the Kyoto Protocol and the clash between the US and the EU on the share of, and the extent to which, I mean, the country could fulfill the objectives beyond the borders. This was also one of the motivation behind the non-ratification of the Kyoto Protocol by the United States. At that time, the debate was around, and I remember being a student selecting joint implementation and clean development mechanisms as a topic. But that was project-based and linked to projects. Generally speaking, offsets, I mean, I think that they are pretty relevant and good in terms of communication, in the sense that involving stakeholders, communication to people, they could also be efficient. We could maybe try to set caps at firm level, sector level, to find a balance between the offsets and real mitigations. Having said that, it is true that mitigation is a priority because it is linked to the innovation capacity and technological organizational capacity of firms. So it's really then linked to also increasing performances. So you innovate through more stringent policies, and then you may enhance your productivity and other performances as well. To conclude, yeah, I mean, even going back a bit to the emission trading and the current generation of revenues, I mean, linking questions 2 and 3. The issue again is to be very linked, strictly linked to what firms and sectors do. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, climate CO2 emissions are linked to specific sectors. So we have to understand the problems and the necessities and the gears and drivers of specific sectors, automotive, ceramics, steel. Okay. This happens especially at regional level because sectors are embedded in regions. One drawback maybe of especially in Italy, of the current situation regarding the emission trading is that the revenue generation and the management is maybe too centralized and happening at the very national level. Okay, and the link with regions and sectors is not so strong. So that's my connection between questions 2 and 3. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Massimiliano. May I call in Peter? What do you think on this issue? Is there a better way to kind of encourage carbon mitigation rather than carbon offset? Because what we need is to cut down emissions.
Yes, you're right. First of all, I would say the European Union at the moment does not use offsets in any of its regulatory measures. It doesn't use it in the emissions trading system anymore. We did, but it didn't work very well. And to be very frank, I'm not a fan of the voluntary carbon market offsets because I think they lack environmental stringency. There is a reason why offsets are trading today at €1.5, which is almost a negligible amount, and it enables companies to pretty well continue as they were doing anyway. The reason they're so cheap is that they can be generated too easily. So the European Union is skeptical about offsets and only requires disclosure of the use of offsets when companies claim to be carbon neutral or, Paris Agreement aligned. There is a requirement in the corporate sustainability disclosure regulation. It's a directive where they have to actually say that they're actually not zero carbon, they're just offsetting their carbon. But beyond the disclosure, there isn't a constraint. But the advocates of voluntary carbon markets say, look, it's better than nothing. It still generates some finance for projects, often in developing countries. And that money goes to countries that badly need the money. So those who advocate in favor of voluntary carbon markets tend to say it's better than nothing. But I don't think it comes anywhere near what is needed now. Because as we've heard, time is running out. The temperature is...
Time is running out, and as someone said recently, we are walking while we should be sprinting. But if you had to say, even out of the widest imagination, what should we have in place to be sprinting instead of walking? What could it be, the ideal tool to invert, kind of change this trajectory towards catastrophe.
Is the question to me? I mean, basically, we need technologies that are sustainable to be cost competitive with fossil fuels. And that is already the case for solar panels now. In many, many countries, it's cheaper in India to produce a new power station based on photovoltaics than it is to base a power station on fossil fuel. If it's cheaper, people will do it. But I hesitate to speak any longer because Francesco has asked for the floor and he says his battery is running out or something. So I better let him have a say.
Yeah. Francesco.
Yeah. Yes, very briefly. I think that we also need to reduce complexity. I'm telling this from a sort of quote unquote outside point of view because I am not exactly a specialist of ESG, but if I look to the entire regulation on environment, it's very complicated. And I think in terms of effort that we need to do, gathering brilliant minds, is also to make ourselves more understandable to policymakers and to people, because we're talking about something which is a big social transformation that involves everybody, not just governments, states, European Union, but also families. And we need to have some even targets, few targets, very few, so that people really know what we are talking about, and we can mobilize public opinion. That's something that I believe is quite necessary if we are talking about a social and transformation.
We can't hear you.
You're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we're reaching the end of our webinar, and we have two questions from the audience. Francesco, can we go ahead and extend a little bit our session? Is that okay? A few minutes more?
No, of course. I am basically over with my battery, so Clara is there, but it's fine.
Okay, so if you all agree, I would just put to you this question that comes from the audience, because we have invited our listeners to put questions to us. So to all the panel, a quick rundown just to answer a question from the audience. So question to Peter, complexity, this is from a student, Alessio D'Amato. A question to Peter, complexity in the transition may be linked also to existing fossil fuel subsidies and to the fact that different energy resources require different infrastructures, and if the different actors are involved, citizens versus the public sector or energy grid managers. Do you think these issues are currently relevant enough in the finance-related agenda?
It's extremely relevant at the moment that we remove all fossil fuel subsidies. And actually, as a result of the war in Ukraine, governments have tended to increase subsidies for fossil fuels. But how can we expect clean energy to compete, new technologies to compete with fossil fuels if the fossil fuels are themselves being subsidized? That's very wasteful in terms of our optimal use of public money. We should therefore eliminate fossil fuel subsidies as quickly as possible. We should make the polluters pay. And with the revenues of that, we should address the question of social fairness, because it's absolutely important. I would fully agree.
Okay, and if we can go to the rest of the panel with a final remark. Professor Massimiliano Mazzanti.
A dopo, grazie.
One final remark, linking to what it was said about social issues. I guess that the focus on increasing inequality, especially at regional level, linked to different economic development paths, needs to be addressed, even using revenues out of taxes, levies and charges, and also using maybe part of the ETS revenue, even if it is something to discuss. But in the link between social and environmental issues, especially in this first phase, or this first phase, in this phase of the transition, is of very strong relevance, yeah, for social acceptability of the transition itself.
Great. Simone, would you like to do a final remark on what we have just discussed, please?
Yes, Annalisa. Well, lots of food for thoughts, and I had to refrain not intervening because I have my own opinion, and Peter, Massimiliano, Tassos, they all know me, and they all know that, you know, we have been working together on these things. So, but I resisted. Even to one of your very interesting questions, Annalisa, I think we will discuss it in Pontignano together, because I have an answer I want to discuss with you. And
Which one?
the one towards non-polluters. How can we reward non-polluters? But I won't say nothing. I won't say anything now. I will tell you my opinion when we next meet.
Okay.
I just want to thank all those who participated. And actually, in particular, Alessio D'Amato, who's the president of the Italian Association of Environmental Resource Economists, I'm sure he feels very young now, because we said we have a student. He was a student, but he's student inside. But apart from jokes, it has been great having you here today. And I do look forward to discussing more in person in Siena, because these topics are fascinating and your opinions are also fascinating. So on this note, I think I will stop here, Annalisa, and I wait for you in Siena.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Simone. Definitely the discussion in Siena promises to be very, very interesting. I have to apologize to some people in the audience because there are more questions coming in, but unfortunately we have to close it here. But please keep following the Facebook page of the Think Tank Vision, and if you can come to the conference in Siena, there will be also debates streamed online, so you can keep following the discussion. So for now, I thank all the participants, and I invite everybody to keep following this very, very important debate. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.